So the beginning of imperialism in India and China, or the Far East, began around the 1600s with Great Britain. This, of course, was during the time where they were still burning witches. China was one of the countries that they traded with, and some of the raw materials included porcelain, which is the stuff that your parents use during nice parties, or also known as China because it comes from China. And the other one was tea, which was a material in which American colonists a few years later ended up dumping into the Atlantic Ocean because they were mad at the British. The other country in which Great Britain traded with was India. And the first group of people who went to go trade with them was the East India Trading Company, which was a British company. This is not to be confused with the West Indies, which is pretty much on the other side of the world, and it's called America. That's the West Indies. Just if you're confused. And of course, the British Empire crowned India the jewel of the king, the crown jewel of the kingdom, just because of the amount of people they had in that country and the amount of resources that they could find. The resources that India had was, of course, indigo or blue dye, not the tie. It's just blue dye, because it's the color of the tie. They had coffee, and if you want coffee, you can have a coffee table. And the final one was tea, which again causes people to dress up like Native American Indians, go crazy, and of course dump tea into the ocean. Splash! And finally, another resource in which they got from India happens to be jute, which is used to make rope. It's often said that rope is powerful enough to hold up a bus off a suspension. Sorry, I couldn't find a rope. So, at the very beginning of the British control over India, they made something called a monopoly, in which the British people owned all the industries in India, and they forced the Indian people to create all of the resources that they eventually gave to the British, which kind of shafted the Indian people, because how would you feel if you were forced to make stuff for some other guy and you weren't really able to profit off of it? So they're like, okay, sad face. But on the other hand, the British introduced railroads to India, as well as roads, telephones, as well as telegraph lines, and finally universities helped civilize and educate the populace. However, one incident that occurred that caused a revolt was when the British made the soldiers in India put pig and cow fat into their gun cartridges. This royally pissed off members of the Indian militia and caused the Sepoy Revolt. Now, this revolt really didn't last very long because Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs didn't really agree with each other. So in the end, a lot of racism ensued, as British people often referred to Indians as so uncivilized. And in response, Indian people just said, well, we don't like you either.